Have you ever wondered why ancient Japan spoke of creatures so terrifying that entire villages would flee at the mere mention of their names? What if I told you some of these beings weren't just stories, but encounters that shaped an entire civilization's understanding of the supernatural world? Welcome to the dark side of Japanese folklore, where the line between myth and reality becomes disturbingly thin. Imagine you're on a solitary evening stroll when you encounter a stunning woman with an unusually pointed face and piercing gaze. She smiles, but something is amiss. Her shadow doesn't resemble her human shape. You've encountered a Kitsune. In Japanese mythology, these supernatural beings were fox spirits capable of shape-shifting into human form. Every 100 years they lived, they would grow an additional tail. The most powerful among them possessed 9 tails and could manipulate fire, see across the entire world, and bend reality itself. This is where the ugliness comes in. Ancient Japanese texts have reference to 2 kinds. The kind Zenko, which were utilized by the rice goddess Inari as messengers, and the malevolent Yako, which delighted in the suffering of mankind. The Yako would destroy crops, slaughter animals, and even possess control over human bodies as their twisted amusement. Medieval Japan was so convinced that they did exist that unmarried women out late at night were suspected of being a disguised kitsune. The animals were said to keep the fox-like characteristics when they assumed the shape of human beings. A cloak of soft fur which they tried to hide, fox-shaped silhouettes, and most tellingly, an inability to photograph their own image without their true form exposed. Tamamo no Mae's legend is that of a 9-tailed kitsune who infiltrated the imperial court of Japan in the guise of a beautiful courtesan. She nearly murdered Emperor Toba before being discovered and executed. Her evil spirit was said to haunt her in a murderous stone that killed anyone she came into contact with. Nowadays, kitsune remain highly integrated into Japanese society. From iconic Inari temples with statues of foxes, to modern anime like Inuyasha and video games like Okami, the shapeshifters remain a source of fascination for the world. Pokemon's 9 tails and Naruto's 9-tailed fox both tip their hats directly to kitsune lore. But if the notion of the fox evolving superpowers after centuries of living seems a little off this planet, just wait until you hear about the next creature. Imagine demons so deadly that their very presence would cause the earth to tremble, and whose appetite for human flesh was matched only by their otherworldly power. Gaze upon the Oni, Japan's most dangerous supernatural beings. These beings were far worse than any nightmare. These massive demons had powerful bodies and brightly colored skin, blood red, deep blue, forest green, or jet black. They had a pointed horn on their forehead, and their jaws were equipped with sharp teeth, which they used to tear flesh. They wielded colossal iron clubs called kanabo that signified their devastating powers. In traditional Japanese mythology, Oni inhabited the far-off mountain caves and eerie forests, abducting defenseless villagers to haul to their lairs. Their role was more vital than monsters. However, they were sentries and torturers for Jigoku, the Buddhist underworld, where they tormented the evil spirits without respite at the command of King Enma, King of the Dead. And this is what made them so actually scary. Oni were not just physical beings, but karmic agents of spiritual revenge. They could travel from the world of the living and the dead, so they were virtually unstoppable once encountered. The cultural impact prevails to this day. Japanese families mark the Mamamaki ritual in February by tossing roasted beans and shouting "Oni wa Soto," demons out. To ward off evil spirits, Oni appear in anime like Blue Exorcist and Demon Slayer, video games like Nioh and Sekiro, and persist to represent the ongoing struggle between good and evil within Japanese literature. But some beings leave you questioning where playfulness ends and horror begins. There's a creature in Japanese folklore known for its oversized anatomy and deadly pranks, that could destroy entire villages. Enter the Tanuki, Japan's most unlikely killer clown. Do not be deceived by their raccoon dog looks. Tanuki were powerful shapeshifters that could turn into a human, an object, or even a building. Tanuki possessed magical powers that allowed them to cause strong illusions, which misled travelers to believe that they were going towards crowded restaurants or inns that were actually vacant meadows in the woods. And here is where the Tanuki legends turned positively sinister. These beasts had a reputation for sadistic pranks that often resulted in human deaths. They would create illusory bridges over bottomless pits, and adventurers would plunge to their death. Others described Tanuki driving merchant caravans of several hundred people into marshes or off cliffs with their deceptions. Japanese folk literature depicts Tanuki in grotesquely amplified form, let's say anatomical features, which they would inflate like balloons and use as weapons, drums, or even a fishing net. It was not merely a device for crude humor. It was a sign of their connection to fertility and prosperity, but also to their wild, untamed nature. Encounters with real-life Tanuki were so common that every Japanese village had its own rituals for viewing and chasing them away. Iron bells were worn by tourists, as it was said to frighten Tanuki illusions back into their true forms. The most popular Tanuki legend is Bunbuki Chagama, a Tanuki who became a tea kettle but retained his tail and legs. When ignited, he would scream in agony, showing his original self. The story became such an integral part of Japanese culture that Tanuki became a metaphor for illusion and deception. Tanuki is loved by contemporary Japan, with Tanuki statues all over the outside of restaurants and stores, intended to bring good fortune. They appear in Studio Ghibli films, video games like Animal Crossing, and hundreds of anime television shows. Iconic Tom Nook is actually based on Tanuki mythology. Now, if shapeshifters are trouble, buckle up for the next creature, one that ruled the very elements themselves. Buckle up all your preconceptions about dragons. Japanese Ryu were not fire-breathing monsters on treasure. They were gods who ruled over the wild forces of life itself. They were not beasts for heroes to defeat, they were gods. Unlike their Western counterparts, the Japanese Ryu were four-legged and winged, but flew based on sheer spiritual power. They had horns like deer, talons like eagles, and scales like fish. Most of all, they ruled over water, weather, and rain, the difference between plentiful harvests and ruinous famines. But it was what made it so terrifying to negotiate with Ryu. They were legendary for being unpredictable. A wronged Ryu had the power to bring floods, droughts, typhoons, or earthquakes upon entire provinces. The ancient Japanese scriptures speak of Ryu rising from the ocean's floor during tempests, their giant forms glimpsed through lightning flashes to either salvage or annihilate. The most well-known Ryu was Ryujin, the king of sea dragons, who lived in an underwater coral palace and reigned over all sea life. Fishermen would offer prayers to Ryujin before going out to sea, for they knew that his anger could be the difference between making it back home or falling victim to the deep. Real medieval Japanese history books write about Ryu sightings in the course of natural disasters. The 1596 earthquake that ruined Kyoto was brought about by the anger of a powerful Ryu underground. They were not mythical creatures. They were attempts to explain and appease powers above man. What is most frightening is that Ryu was instructed to assume the shape of mankind, to test the nature of human beings. They would assume the shape of beggars, merchants, or beautiful ladies, paying back kindness with success and rewarding cruelty with tragedy. These dragons infiltrate current Japanese popular culture, from the Dragon Balls of Dragon Ball Z to Princess Mononoke's majestic dragons. Dragon tattoos serve the Yakuza as a symbol of strength and wisdom, and dragon festivals continue to course through Japan, paying homage to these water gods from ages past. If the divine dragons are ferocious, though, our next beast makes them look like they're made of sugar and spice and everything nice. There's a monster from Japanese legend so terrible that it took Japan's greatest warriors and strongest priests uniting to fight against and win over it. A monster whose very name stifled shudders in the emperor's hearts. That monster was Shuten Doji, the demon king of Mount Ui. More than 15 feet high, Shuten Doji possessed the body of a giant with protruding muscles, burning red skin, crazy black hair, and large horns sprouting out of his forehead. His iron-sharp fangs were mounted in his mouth, and his eyes gleamed like hot coals. But his physical body was nothing compared to his brains and sorcery. This was no common Oni. Their commander-in-chief was Shuten Doji. He possessed superhuman strength capable of leveling mountains, magical abilities capable of creating illusions, and bending lesser demons to his command. And worse still, an insatiable hunger for human flesh and blood, young women's preferably. The Heian period history reports how Shuten Doji frightened the countryside. He raided the capital, Kyoto, regularly, kidnapping women of the nobility and taking them back to his mountain stronghold. The cries of his victims were heard echoing through the valleys, and great tracts of country were laid waste with terror. What was so terrifying about Shuten Doji was the fact that he was intelligent. He was not a stupid monster, but was very clever, could talk, and enjoyed psychological torment. He would insist that the victims see what had befallen the other abductees before killing them. The most popular version of the legend tells of how Minamoto no Yorimitsu, the legendary hero, and his 4 attendants entered Shuten Doji's fortress disguised as priests. They poisoned his wine, and while the Demon King was weakened, engaged in a cosmic battle that raged on throughout the night. Shuten Doji's head tried to bite Yorimitsu even after decapitation, so the warrior had to don many helmets to ward off the attack. This mythos permeated so deeply into Japanese society that Shuten Doji is the second to last evil, which is defeated through courage, intelligence, and the power of the gods. He appears in kabuki theater, later manga like Hell Teacher Noob, video games like Shin Megami Tensei, and remains the symbol of what evil lies deep in the mountains of Japan. Discussing monsters that haunt Japan's countryside, our final monster causes death by the mere touch of her hand. On the cold winter nights, when it snows so much that the world becomes a canvas of white, travelers at times encounter a creature who is death itself. She appears to be a tall, ethereal, beautiful woman, with black hair that falls about her face and pale blue lips, dressed in a white kimono that dissolves into the snow that dances about her. She is deathly pale, almost translucent, and her touch brings instant death by supernatural cold that freezes the blood within your veins. But that is the terror of Yuki-Onna sightings. She kills not indiscriminately. She is encountered by lost travelers in the snowstorms, providing directions now and then, instantaneous death otherwise. Her victims stiffen from cold, their faces pulled back into frozen scowls of fear, with nothing to indicate violence, save the supernatural chill that killed them. There are several kinds of Yuki-Onna interactions in Japanese legend. Some of the legends describe how she permits travelers who are kind to her or promise not to tell anyone that they have met her. Others speak about her appearing as a lost woman who is taken in as a guest, and then drains the life from travelers who attempt to aid her. The best-known legend is that of a youth named Mosaku, who encountered Yuki-Onna when it was snowing heavily. She spared his life on condition that he would never tell any of them that he had encountered her. Years later, it was when he spoke to his wife about their encounter that he discovered his wife was a Yuki-Onna. She vanished into the darkness, along with his children. What's so terrifying about Yuki-Onna is the realization that she embodies the lethal beauty of winter itself. She's not necessarily evil in nature so much as she's a personification of a natural phenomenon, beautiful, seductive, and flat-out lethal to anyone who isn't tough enough to handle the harsh reality of winter. There are ongoing reports of Yuki-Onna seen in the real world up until today, namely rural Japan during blizzards and sub-freezing temperatures. Skeptics write them off as hypothermic hallucinations, but believers claim the Snow Woman still rides among the snowflake. Yuki-Onna has been borrowed by modern Japanese horror in several hundred horror films, anime television series like Hellgirl, and computer games like Fatal Frame. She represents the fine line between beauty and death, seduction and destruction. These six are not simply stories. They're peepholes into Japan's prehistoric view of our world's supernatural energies. Demon kings and heavenly dragons, shape-shifting foxes, and murderous snow demons. These creatures captivate us today because they represent primal human desires and terrors.